One happy Wednesday to you. Happy New Year to all you out there listening. I hope everyone had a good and safe New Year's. Mine, as I've gotten older, has gotten less and less. I guess how can we say this? Less and less active or dramatic, if you will. It used to be being in a band. I was usually playing on New Year's somewhere and stuff like that, and pretty. What I'll say is pretty good party time, pretty good party action. And to now, I think I started falling asleep around 9:30 after my wife, daughter, and I had our traditional New Year's Eve dinner of a very 70s and retro fondue. But it was fun nonetheless. Of course, all the fireworks and stuff go off around the house and kind of freaks the dog out. So that's always a bit of a spectacle. But that's probably about the highlight of our excitement for the New Year's Eve holiday. But I hope everyone out there had a good one, whatever you were doing, and hope it was safe. Not a whole lot to update as far as hunting related goes, or hunting related activities go on this go around. I did get a chance to get out and get one late season hunt in so far. It was pretty much a rainer. I was in a blind, sitting along a food source, and just didn't see anything. It was more of probably an action of getting out in the outdoors a little bit. Didn't have high hopes necessarily for the hunt. Was hoping to probably maybe take a doe. I was actually hunting with my buddy Wilson, who you guys heard of or heard from on a few podcasts ago. It seems like he and I, every time we don't hunt together, we see deer. Anytime we do hunt together, we do not see deer. But hopefully we'll turn the tide on that here during the course of the late season, because we both enjoy spending some time and hunting together and getting to hang out. So we'll continue to do that. Hopefully we'll get to fill some tags, and then of course I'll be heading into the swamp to give that one last sachet here. Really going to pull a camera card in there and see if anything has returned since rut. I'm not sure what's going to be going on in there. It's like I said, many times before, this is the first year hunting that piece. So, a lot of what I'm doing this year on there is just, really learning what's going on there. And then I do plan to try to make it back to my dad, since I do have that Wicked Greens food plot that I want to try to hit up, because I haven't had a chance to hit that up during late season once the weather kind of shifted and got cold. So I'm hoping to make it back there to do a set, near that. Don't know that I'll sit right over top of it necessarily, but probably, somewhere where deer will probably, funnel through on their way to it. There's two setups that I really be kind of eyeing for that spot. I have contemplated actually putting a ground blind in one area, because what I've seen on camera is they like to kind of pop out in this one specific area, and there's really not any trees to get any type of saddle or stand or anything in. So I was thinking of possibly ground blind hunting that, but we'll see if we make it back, because I got a little bit of a busy January coming up. ATA will be coming up here, in the next two-ish weeks or whatever. And I'll be there for a little while. And I have, of course, the project I've been kind of alluding to on the previous podcast that's about to kick off and get launched. So I have some work to do with that. So I'm hoping that I'm able to get out and get a couple more hunts in, and hopefully fill at least one of these other doe tags, maybe a buck tag if we get lucky. But we'll just have to see how the rest of my January shakes out. But we have a great show today. I won't belabor this up front too much. I definitely want to get into talking to Taylor. You may have seen him on a recent First Light video that was put out, a First Light short film that was put out about urban bow hunting. It's not exclusively that he hunts in urban areas, because he does get out and do some what we'll call bigger woods hunting. It's not big woods necessarily, but traditional what I'll call rural deer hunting. He does get out and get a chance to do that on a couple different occasions during the course of the year. But by and large, he does a lot of his hunting. I would say the majority of his hunting in and around the area that he lives, near DC. So therefore, as you can imagine, there's a lot of urban areas. It's a densely populated urban area, so lots of houses, lots of structures, and things like that. So that's where he's doing a lot of his hunting, which is something that I've started kind of doing this year as I live outside of Philadelphia, and kind of encounter some similar type of similar things in terms of developments, homes, buildings, and things like that, and trying to find the little nooks and crannies where deer might be hiding. He hunts, a crazy amount of days, well over 100, probably pushing 200 days a year that he's actually out in the timber, because where he's at, there's the season, I believe, is all year round to a degree. So he's a guy that gets a lot of saddle time in. He's a saddle hunter too, so we talk about that a little bit. And then we actually cover, a decent amount of ground, just kind of talking about hunting, its perception, its heritage, and how we can be better stewards of hunting. Particularly whenever you hunt and when you live and hunt in these urban areas, because a lot of the folks you're encountering when you're hunting their property, or whether you're trying to recover a deer or whatever the case might be, these folks probably aren't super knowledgeable about hunting. Certainly, if they do have any type of understanding of what hunting is, it's probably skewed. And I'm not going to say everyone, but I'm going to say it's probably heavily skewed for most of them. With the stereotypes that we do not particularly want to portray or be known for. And so we talk a little bit about that and the importance around those encounters that you have when you are hunting in these urban areas, and how important they are in the overall general population understanding of hunting and acceptance of it. So with that, we'll go ahead and get ready to get cracking with Taylor. But before we do that, let's take a quick second to talk about our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. We're brought to you by Wicked Tree Gear, the longest lasting, fastest cutting, toughest tree trimming equipment you have ever used. Simply put, the toughest saws on earth. How tough are they? Tough enough to come with a lifetime warranty. And right now, when you visit wickedtreegear.com, use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and get a 20% discount on your Wicked purchase. We're also brought to you by Exodus Outdoor. The new Trek is a byproduct of all the consumer voices who have been excited about what Exodus trail cameras have to offer, but just can't fit a $200 camera in their budget. And that's all right. A budget-friendly camera backed by the industry's leading warranty is now here. The Trek is $145. It has the same proprietary shell design as the Lift series cameras, same 5-year warranty, unmatched customer service policies, photo, video, time-lapse, and hybrid modes, all with a simple single-line backlit LED display. And you also get about 20,000 images on a set of lithium batteries, so you save yourself some cash OLA on batteries there as well. If you'd like to learn more, head over to ExodusOutdoorGear.com and check them out. If you dig what you see, use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and save yourself $20. We're also brought to you by Tecomate Seed. Everything is bigger in Texas. No matter if you're in the South, Midwest, or Northeast, Tecomate has your food plot seed needs covered. See what I did there? A little alliteration. Visit Tecomate.com and check out their product selector tool to help you pick the right seed for your food plot. Use promo code TRUTH at checkout and save 20%. You might be saying, Clint, it's the end of the season. The growing season's over. Why would I ever think about doing a food plot? Well, the reason being, or why would I ever think now about beginning to do food plots? Well, it's because frost seeding is not too far away, and you definitely want to get a jump on that for your properties or for your plots that you can frost seed, and it's never too early to start planning for next year's food plots. So with that, we have a great show. We're going to go ahead and get Taylor on the line. Hope you all enjoy it. Thanks for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have on Taylor Chamberlin. Some of you out there listening might know of him from a recent film he did with First Light, but he is a diehard bow hunter. He is an urban bow hunter, and he hunts. That's part of what we're going to talk about today a little bit. And he's also a diehard saddle hunter, if I'm not mistaken. How's it going, man?
I'm awesome. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. So I'm stoked to have you on. I know we had a nice conversation, almost a podcast before the podcast.
Yeah, our pre-podcast, our appetizer.
Yeah, you got a pre-game. Speaking of appetizers, dude, my wife has a friend over today. It's the holiday season, so people are passing through the house and stuff like that. And I got to tell you, dude, I'm ready for the holiday season to be over because I'm ready for all the food to be gone because I do nothing but like walk by and graze. I feel like I'm in a constant state of feeling like I could throw up. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, it's fantastic. My wife loves to bake, I'm always quality testing the baked goodies that are coming out of the oven, and our house just smells like a chocolate chip factory. Yeah, so that doesn't suck for me, but in a month from now, when I've gained like 15 pounds from eating all this crap,
exactly,
grazing on all the food at the dining room table, I definitely won't regret it.
Yeah, exactly. I just kind of throw all my, I usually eat pretty healthy, so I throw all that out the window during this time of year, and then I also, unfortunately, I get a little lazy on the workout too, which usually creates some pain. And just after the 1st of January, the first couple weeks of January, when I get back on the horse, so to speak. But you're right, man. This time of year wreaks havoc on the old weight gain front. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's not friendly to the waistline, but that's why you have New Year's come up, so you can just make promises that you'll hit the gym that most people won't fulfill after a couple of weeks.
Right, exactly. You know what does the best for me, man, is if I actually have a Western hunt planned. Like I have no problem getting ready. And it's like I get into good shape and I'm good to go. But it's like if I don't have a Western hunt, I'm like, I can whitetail hunt slightly out of shape. Like I'm in pretty good shape, so I can get it done without being like, hiking at 12,000 feet for 15 miles shape. You know what I mean? But
100%. I think everybody in their life should go out to the Rockies and try to hunt elk, and that will put you in a fitness routine faster than anything else. Because I did that 3 years ago now. I went out for opening week of elk season in September, kind of near Eagle, Colorado, and I was nowhere close to ready, and I got smoked by the mountains and felt like a quarter of a man. And I just, I remember sitting there going like, I'm coming back and I'm going to kick the crap out of this mountain at some point in my life.
Yeah. And
I look forward to doing that. I'm actually heading to Idaho in September coming up. I'm trying to put a trip together with a couple buddies, and I'm like, I was telling one of them the other day, I was like, I need to start jogging now,
right?
Like with weights on my back, and started playing, because I mean, as you mentioned in the intro, like I'm an urban hunter, dude. I walk 50 yards to a tree stand, 100 yards to a tree stand. I'm not used to hiking 12 miles with a ruck on my back. It's just, it's a different world at altitude, mind you. I'm also a flatlander. Like, I live at sea level.
Yeah, exactly, man. You got everything working against you. I did a hunt, I guess it was 2 years ago, and I was fortunate. The two of the guys I was going with, one was my cousin, one was a good friend of ours, and they go out pretty much every year. And then one of our friends actually lives in Montana, and he works for the U.S. Forest Service out there. So he's always in the mountains, and he's a hell of a hunter too. And so I kind of knew what I was getting into. And on top of that, our buddy who lives in Montana runs like Spartan races and stuff like that. So he is like, he looks like someone chiseled him out of marble, essentially. You know what I mean? So it's like, I knew going out there that I was going to be hunting with him. I was like, dude, I gotta be in good shape. I was like, otherwise, like, I'm just going to get killed. I was like, I'm just not going to hang. So I trained like a madman, where I think I was down to like 145 pounds before I left for the trip. Yeah. I'm like 5'8", so it's like, that's not too terribly skinny, but like I was doing like 3 to 5 mile runs with like a 40 pound weight vest. And I was doing all my resistance workouts with a 40-pound weight vest on. Then I started doing marathon sprint training, where you do like interval sprints. Mm-hmm. And I was doing that with a 40-pound vest. And that was like, dude, I was in like diesel shape. And I went out there and was like, I didn't have any altitude sickness, like nothing. Like it was the first day I could tell the air was thinner. And then after that, I was good. I was good to go. So I played the game right, because I knew if I didn't, those dudes, because my buddy would just like take off. Like he doesn't take even a bottle of water with him. You go out to hike all day. He doesn't take food. He doesn't take any water. He doesn't take a compass. He doesn't take anything. He's a legit a mountain man. And he just goes.
That's amazing. Well, first of all, it sounds like you were training for the NFL Combine.
I know, right?
Marathon sprints, but I mean, I was the opposite of that. I had like 3 compasses. I had one like tied to my neck. I had like 5 gallons of water in the back. I mean, it was bad. It was, we were joking, it was like City Boys head west, because I didn't have an effing clue what I was doing.
Right. Yeah.
And that was pretty obvious. I didn't even see an elk. I heard a bugle, which was pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah, it's all relative. Yeah. The standards went down pretty quickly from once I saw the terrain that we were partying in.
Right.
That was it was like, I think if we just get like an opportunity at elk, that is good.
Right. Yeah. I mean, dude, the thing is like, it for folks who have not gone out and done that, it's one of those things where it's like, I always say, like, man, if you're a hunter, especially if you're a bow hunter, like even if you think you might not like to hunt elk, dude, just do yourself a favor and take that trip, because you will see some of the coolest landscapes and the coolest stuff you'll ever see on that type of trip. We were pretty lucky where we saw elk. We actually got one. I went the full draw on one, and I saw a really, really nice 6x6 I just couldn't get a shot at. So we got into a few. I had a couple opportunities at some mule deer that I just couldn't seal the deal on. So it was a pretty good trip, but I was the same way, where I was taking like a pile of water like the first like 2 days, and like the third day in, I had a hand piece, bear spray, and a pile of water in my pack. By the third day, I had no bear spray, no handpiece, and and like a bottle of water.
And it was all like halfway up the mountain.
Yeah. I was like,
just getting rid of weight.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not carrying this stuff anymore. I was like, that was one of the criteria for me to go. Is my wife was like, you need to be carrying bear spray with you, and so on and so forth. I was like, yeah, I'll carry it. And it's like I carried it like the first 2 days, and I was like, man, anything that is not necessary, I am ditching. So
yeah, for sure.
But we got off on a tangent there a little bit, but I want to kind of bring us back to whitetails. I feel like we know a lot about you already, but for those out there who haven't seen the film and maybe aren't as aware of who you are and what you do, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a little bit of background about yourself, where you live, where you're from, what you do professionally, and then of course what you're doing in the whitetail world.
Well, if you haven't seen the awesome film that my buddies over at Capture Creative and First Light made, definitely check that out. It's on YouTube. I highly recommend it.
Great film, by the way.
Thanks, man. All I had to do was stand in front of the camera and try to look pretty. They had the real work at hand with trying to make me look pretty and make it look good. But no, it was a blast, man. Just hanging out with those guys and making the film. But so my name's Taylor Chamberlin. I'm a diehard whitetail fanatic. I live right outside Washington, D.C., which most people probably have heard of. If you haven't heard of that, you should probably stop driving and Google it. Yeah. So my main profession, I'm a real estate developer. So I build houses, mostly residential homes. We do some commercial work. And when I'm not working, I am hunting. So for people that aren't familiar with the DC area, we have a huge overabundance of whitetail, somewhere in the tune of, our carrying capacity should be in the 12 to 14 deer per square mile. We have so many deer here, we're not able to actually quantify how many deer we have.
Wow.
The closest estimates are in the 400 to 450 deer per square mile range.
Wow.
That's crazy. So like, if you look at a nighttime shot with a FLIR of, parkland, for example, it just looks like the anthill had the top kicked off of it and they're running everywhere.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a major problem because they're just, they're destroying the forest. The browse line is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And we can go into big detail on that, but because of that overabundance of whitetail, we're able to hunt year round here. And with a bow and arrow, you can hunt on private property. The seasons are a little trickier than just open season, have at 'em boys. But, you're able to hunt 12 months out of the year, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And it's really interesting. It's pretty cool what you can see and experience and learn when you spend, a full year hunting deer. So I tend to be able to hunt anywhere from 150 to 200 days a year. And last year, when I found out that my wife was pregnant, I spent every day I possibly could in the tree stand because I was terrified that it might go away. So I think I hunted like 235 or 240 days last year. So if it was not like raining sideways or blowing ice, I was in a tree.
Wow.
And with that many days you get to spend in a tree, obviously you get to harvest a lot of deer. So, I kill anywhere between 30 and 60 deer a year, 40 and 60 deer a year. Some years, much higher than that in the, 75 to 100 plus range. So, wow. We're not hurting for meat at our house.
I guess not.
And what's really cool in Virginia, we have a program called Hunters for the Hungry, where we're able to donate a deer that's been harvested to a butcher, and it's free of charge for the hunter. The butcher gets paid by this program, Hunters for the Hungry, to process the deer, and then it goes to local food shelters to feed the homeless and less fortunate. Cool. Yeah, it's a great way to take something that we have an overabundance of, which is a natural resource, and use that to help people that need help. So It really, really helps everybody out. And, it helps me out a lot because, one, there's no way I'd know what to do with that many deer. And two, I have a lot of people and we can go into this in detail, but where I am, there's not a lot of exposure to hunters.
Right.
The people that I'm talking to that get permission really have never met people that hunted for the most part, or if they have, it's like a cousin or a distant relative, and they're for the most part indifferent on hunting. And when they find out that a lot of the food is going to feed the homeless or feed the less fortunate, the needy, that tends to be the tipping point that gets me permission on property.
Wow.
So
okay.
It's all good all across the board there.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I know that QDMA did a survey. I want to say it was last year where they talked a little bit about. I don't remember the precise kind of premise of the survey, but they were doing a survey to kind of get an understanding of people's feelings about hunting. Whether it's hunting for sport or whether you call it sport, I guess was the way it was phrased. Whether you call it sport or whether it's for meat or for whatever the case might be. And it came back resoundingly that folks, are okay with hunting if it's hunting for meat. You know what I mean? And so I think that that's really, really cool that, in your area you have a situation set up where folks can, give back to the folks who are less fortunate, and it can go back to, basically to be a clean form of protein for people as opposed to eating, less than ideal, forms of nutrition, which is really cool. And then on top of it, it kind of opens up the door for a conversation, with those who are non-hunters, which is rad.
I totally agree. And on top of all that, I mean, I've had probably half a dozen homeowners now ask me to teach them how to hunt because they want to figure out how to get a cleaner source of protein for their families. Mm-hmm. So it's almost come full circle where, I think that more people nowadays than ever in the distant past care about the quality of the food they're putting in their body. And, mm-hmm. and if anybody who's into, personal health or just quality of food that you're eating in general, if you look at kind of what's in our food now mm-hmm. and what's not in a deer, or how much cleaner that food source is, how could you not want to eat that over something that you weren't fully connected with in the harvesting process of, and you're unsure of its quality of life or what it was eating or what, stuff got squirted into it or whatever. Mm-hmm. If you're able to source local, organic, grass-fed protein, wouldn't you want that? And everybody's like, well, of course.
Right.
Well, that's in your backyard, and that's right. What I'm trying to, reduce for you for free. So I actually have a doctor who's a client of mine who he is not a hunter at all. He's actually, I'd say, a little left of center on hunting in right. general. However, he's convinced that all of the the majority of the health problems in our country are directly or indirectly related to the food that we're eating and the processed food and just the quality of our protein sources. Mm-hmm. And so he has me come hunt his property and give him the deer that I'm harvesting. Mm-hmm. And through him, I've gotten the door opened up to a ton of other properties for other doctors that he is friends with that are in that same mindset. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, you look at that. I mean, how could you not want to just put venison on your family's table as opposed to beef and chicken and all that? So
yeah, I mean, one of the things I always tell folks is, there's a reason why, like, you can take an elk, right, that you kill in a mountain or a deer, or whatever the case might be, and you could literally carve off a piece of meat and you could eat it raw and you would be fine, right? The reason you have to cook beef and all these domesticated, forms of protein, cook the life out of it for the most part, or that they suggest that you do, is because you're really cooking the impurities out of the animal that they've been kind of injected with to get them to a point to be harvested or to be slaughtered or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's, that's kind of, I guess rule number one is like, if I can eat it raw, then it's gotta be clean and it's gotta be good. Because if you think back to, we don't even have to go back to prehistoric times or caveman times, I guess it would be a better way to put it. We could go back to as early as like I won't say civilizing, but, kind of taking over the West, if you will, from whenever Native Americans kind of ruled the Western plains and so forth. It wasn't like they had like a way to tell something was like medium well done. You know what I mean? Yeah. It wasn't like they were looking at a piece of buffalo or a piece of venison on a stick, cooking it over the fire, going, yeah, that looks like it's probably 175 degrees. You know what I mean? It's like, no, they would put it on the fire, and then whenever it looked like it was about right to them, they ate it, or they didn't. You know what I mean? And they weren't any worse off for it. It's interesting that doctor brought up the whole idea of like the illnesses and stuff like that. And now we're totally not talking about deer hunting, but we are in a roundabout way. But it's just interesting because I was listening to a podcast, and there was a doctor on that was talking about it. And I work in marketing and advertising, and a lot of what I do is like is working in the healthcare field. And there's like, I forget what the number was that they did a study, and like, I don't remember if it was like it was a third party. So it wasn't like someone who was it wasn't like an insurance company did it or whatever. It was a third party that was kind of looking at the cost of our healthcare in this country, and relative to like what is the next big like recession gonna, like what is going to create the next big like loss of wealth in this country, essentially was what it came down to, was what they were looking at. And overwhelmingly the number one thing that's going to create that is an impending healthcare crisis. Because what they were basically talking about, and the doctor was really kind of talking about, he was getting around to, he was a big proponent of like eating, raw, organic, free range, even like, I think he was like, he followed a keto diet or whatever. And what they basically found was, or it's not rocket science, but what they've finally kind of started to admit to was that, all chronic diseases, for the most part, I won't say all because I'm not a doctor, but a large majority of chronic diseases are caused by inflammation. Right. Mm-hmm. And where does inflammation come from? Inflammation comes from, a lot of times sugars and grains and so forth, was basically what he was saying. So he was like, when you cut those types of things out of your diet and you introduce healthy fats and clean proteins that don't have, aren't injected with antibiotics and all these things, all of a sudden the inflammation in your body goes down, because a lot of these chronic illnesses is your body reacting to severe inflammation or long-term inflammation that your body's just kind of learned to deal with over time. And so that was one of the things that he kind of talked about, and it was really interesting because it was all kind of hinged on the idea of, healthy proteins or wild caught proteins being a great source of clean protein to remove some of the bad stuff from your plate in a very, very quick way, in the sense of hunting can allow you to do that. So it's not as though you have to buy only free range grass fed, bison for $13 a pound at the grocery store. It's like, no, you can go out and hunt, and you can harvest an elk, you can harvest a deer or whatever, and get the same quality of meat, probably even better than you would get in the grocery store, even when you're buying those free range and grass fed proteins and stuff like that. So I thought it was just really interesting whenever he looked at it from that context. So like, if you read even further into it, the net is that hunting can be help be a solution to some of the healthcare epidemic that we're facing. It was kind of like the net. So
100% though. And actually what's surprising is we're seeing hunting numbers are going down across the board for the most part over the last 10, 15 years as the 1960s, 1970s hunters like our parents and grandparents are growing older and passing away, and you don't really have a lot of people that are stepping in and taking that void. Well, I read a study recently where it was saying that, the hipster culture mm-hmm. is the largest influx of new hunters, because these people all want to figure out how to source organic free-range meat, and they don't want to pay the $13 a pound that the bison is at Whole Foods or whatever.
Yep.
And they're going, well, I want to be a hunter-gatherer. I want to figure out how to do this myself, and how do I do it? And the article I read was all about, how to try and incorporate these guys into the hunting kind of good old boy circle, if you will, and talk to them and teach people how to hunt, because, we need more hunters in the woods, especially here where we have a, huge overabundance of deer and not a lot of hunters. And these people want to get out and do it. So, I mean, why not teach anybody who wants to learn?
100%, man. Like, I couldn't agree with you more. I think I think part of, and I've talked a little bit about this with a couple past guests, not this exact topic, but like asked the question of what they'd been in the outdoor industry a long time and they've been doing this for 40, 50 years. And I was just curious what their take was on what they felt was like a good evolution and a bad evolution of hunting. Like, where are we and how are we doing, and get their read on it since they've been, in the game a long time. And a lot of it is still like, a lot of the challenges is the divisiveness. Like, we can't hold our hunting and our hunting heritage. And I don't want this to come off sounding the wrong way, because I think that there's part of it that you want to hold tightly that is, historical, and it's the heritage aspect of it. But there's part of it too that, like, just like whenever you have kids, and anyone who's a parent, and I'm not sure if you and your wife have had your the Bambino yet, but once you do, like, you'll quickly kind of realize this. It's like you love them dearly, just like we might love hunting dearly, right? But there's at some point you can't any longer shape who they are. And so in the hunting sense, like, there comes a point where you can no longer shape and dictate what it's going to be for the betterment of it. You have to let it just ultimately become what it is intended to become. So it's like, if that means it bringing people in who maybe don't always share the same exact viewpoints that we do as a historical hunting culture, right? That's not necessarily a bad thing. You know what I mean? It's like having some change and some new ideas and some new ways of thinking about things is not the end, the end of hunting as we know it necessarily, right?
No, it's better.
Yeah, exactly. It might be the way that we get to be able to continue it, right? Because the alternative is that we keep those people out, we lose our numbers, we lose our voice, and then we lose our pastime and our heritage. Like, right. Those are the two roads how I see it.
I totally agree. And when you have, a difference of opinion and you're able to have a discussion across the board, and hear both sides of it and come to a resolution, whatever you're working on grows for the better.
Yeah.
To have, I sit on a couple different board of directors, and, one of them's a relatively hostile board. And, at the end of the meetings, it's like, hey, like, this is good. We were able to move forward and grow somewhere. But, when you look at, for the first time in our country, we're the furthest away or furthest removed from where our food comes from than we have ever been. And that's where I think you see a lot of people having a problem with hunting, is because they just don't realize or don't think about the fact that when they walk through the grocery store, all that meat there came from somewhere, and so if, I have some people that are adamantly opposed to hunting, and I ask them, well, do you eat meat? I'm like, yeah, I eat meat. Well, if you eat meat and you are adamantly opposed to hunting, that really doesn't hold a lot of validity, in my opinion. For you to be telling me that I can't go source my own meat, in your opinion. Now, I understand if you're worried about the, how ethical it is or whatever, and I'm happy to have a dialogue with anybody who wants to, in that manner. But, I think for the most part, a lot of people in this country just don't realize where their food comes from.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's not 1960 where, like, we all have, a couple chickens in the backyard and we know where they're going to end up in a couple of weeks,
Right.
And not that everybody had that in 1960, but as food's getting more processed, it is able to travel further. And as it travels further, you have more and more metropolitan type areas where people don't venture out and don't think about where a lot of their meat comes from. So,
yep.
Sorry, we got way off topic.
No, it's a good topic, and I'm always glad to have this discussion. I think it's one that, actually these types of discussions actually excite me more in a lot of ways than just the hunting conversations. And this is a hunting conversation, but I wanted to add to that because what you're saying is 100% true. I had a buddy of mine last year, and folks who listen to the podcast heard the story, but he was a friend of mine who worked with me. He's from New York, like out, not from the city, it was like the suburbs. I think he was around like the Rochester area is where he grew up. And then he lived in LA for like 10 years. He shot film and videography for like National Geographic and stuff like that. And then moved back here, and he's a designer. He and his wife live just in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And
I would always talk to him about hunting and stuff like that. And he was always interested because he likes adventure, and he also likes the locavore movement. Like he likes to eat local foods. He likes to drink local beers. Like he's all about like understanding the story of where things came from that he's eating, right? He's just into that stuff. And so one day, finally, he was talking about, if I got a turkey, if I'd let him try some, because he's never had a wild turkey before. He's never eaten it. I shared some elk with him. I shared some, venison with him, some goose, with him. And I finally just said, I was like, hey, why don't you just take the exam, get your license? And I was like, I'll just take you turkey hunting and we'll try to get your own for you. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah. And it was like, he was like, I never thought in a million years I'd be able to go hunt because I didn't have anybody show me how, And so it was just that moment saying, hey, why don't I take you to go do this? And it was like dunzo, right? He was all in. So he went turkey hunting, and I'm getting ready to take him on a goose hunt this winter yet, and so he's super stoked to, like, for the first time, try to like bag his own protein, you know what I mean? Which is super cool to watch someone get stoked about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, anytime I've run across anyone who is trying to learn how to hunt or wants to get out and hunt, I mean, you see that desire there, but they don't know the next step to take. I'm more than happy to help anyone like that. And I have a handful of guys that I'm working with right now that are in various stages of learning how to hunt and teaching them how to shoot bows, and then get them real proficient, and then make sure that I'm comfortable with their proficiency, and then teach them how to climb a tree and be safe in doing that, and taking them through all those processes up to how to shoot a deer, because I never had that. I never had anyone that taught me how to hunt. And I think in teaching yourself, you learn. I mean, you have quickly because you're forced to, but in the same regard, you have to have a super drive to want to do that. Not a lot of people do, and especially here in the suburbs where it's not very welcoming to learning how to hunt. I mean, if we were out in Montana with a ton of walk-in hunting areas, that's great. You have more area to kind of play around on and learn. And, our learning curve is a little steeper here in the burbs because,
it's like you missed it might be the neighbor's dog.
Or I mean, the biggest nightmare in the suburbs is a long tracking job. Right. Because what I'm hunting on is a half-acre, quarter-acre lot. And the difference between a deer running 40 yards and piling up and a deer running 400 yards and bedding that's gut shot is the difference between, like, a major problem and just a normal night. And when that deer runs 400 yards, God knows how many property lines it's crossing, and that, let's say it runs across 8 properties. Well, now that's 8 doors I have to knock on, 8 different people that might be pissed off that now know I'm like operating in the area, 8 backyards that could have a pool in the back that the deer piled up into, and my wife is going to be pissed if we have to pay to clean another pool out.
Right. I hear another.
Yeah. That was not a fun morning.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so when you have a lot of, exposure to that, that's never good in an urban setting. And so, I always try to be out of sight, out of mind. Not that I'm doing anything illegal, but the less blatant I am that I'm flaunting around that I'm hunting in their backyard, the less chance I have of running into an issue. And that's the biggest concern for me is being efficient in my hunts, as far as getting as many harvests as I can, and then also making sure that when the opportunity does present itself, that I'm as quick and clean with the kill as possible, because I just can't afford to have take a pot shot or take a poor shot that results in
cleaning
not
the pool.
having cleaning the pool, having it run across into the school bus or something. So
right. Before we continue our conversation, let's talk about Wicked Tree Gear saws. Hardcore deer hunters need hardcore tools. Do yourself a favor and check out Wicked Tree Gear, the toughest hand saws and pull saws on earth. You buy it once, you buy it for life, backed by a lifetime guarantee. Right now, if you use the promo code TRUTH, you'll save 20% on your next purchase with free ground shipping. So head over to wickedtreegear.com and get a saw that's tough enough to work as hard as you hunt.
I want to talk a little bit about, how you, because I heard you say, like you kind of started hunting on your own. I want to talk about that, but before we do that, I wanted to kind of go back and kind of build on a point that you made on the last point that we were talking about, where it was folks who don't hunt, and have a problem with people who do hunt, but yet they eat meat and so on and so forth. There's always that kind of dynamic when you run into some non-hunters and stuff like that. Just because I wanted to make mention of this, because I recently had this exact same conversation, and I don't want to say I found a way to win the conversation, because it's not about winning necessarily. It's just about enlightening, I guess, is a better way to put it. And this person is a person that I work with, and her family's French. They're all from France, so it's very that's kind of like their approach. So very left of center, if you will. Has a problem with hunting just in general. Doesn't eat much meat, but will occasionally and stuff like that. And so we were kind of talking about it a little bit, and and she kind of asked me the question, well, why wouldn't you just buy it, right? And one of the things I had said, because she's also very much environmentally conscious as well, right? I said, I was like, and I just kind of stopped her there, and I said, well, I don't know if you recognize this or not. I was like, but, at the rate that we're going to grow all the plants and to continue to, not grow, but, build, larger numbers of domesticated cattle, sheep, whatever the case might be, it's like that ultimately takes land away, right? That ultimately hurts the ecology of a habitat. Right. I was like, because you have to make more land for grazing, which ultimately pushes out, animals that inhabited that place, previously into tighter and tighter quarters, which you put animals in tighter and tighter quarters. They have less and less resources, which then creates starvation, disease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And she didn't really ever think of that. And so then I also turned her on to, I was like, there's a guy, by the name of Shane Mahoney. Anyone out there that's never heard of Shane Mahoney, I urge you to go watch him on YouTube and watch him talking or listen to him talk on other podcasts, because he's incredible. He's probably like the foremost leader of conservation in the world, pretty much. World governments hire him to come in and help them figure out how to conserve their native species and so forth. But he has a wild harvest initiative program, I think is what it's called, where he's actually doing, I forget how long the study is, but he's doing a long study to kind of figure out what is the price of a pound of clean protein, right? Like, what is the world value to it? Because he understands to get some world governments, and more specifically, he's talking about some third world governments that don't and can't value wildlife the same way just because their economy doesn't allow them to, is trying to figure out how to put a value on it. So world governments look at this as like an opportunity to create value, and that it is a money opportunity for them, right? So you can then say, and I'm making this very elementary just for the purpose of this conversation, but that you can say, when you harvest a deer, it creates 30 pounds of clean protein, which has a value of X at the market, which means we are able to remove, if 100 hunters hunt and they get 30 pounds apiece, we can remove this many head of cattle from the landscape that need to be domesticated and use resources from our land that could be otherwise used by wildlife, right? So he's putting a value to it, so he can kind of show that hunters are actually helping like conservation, which we all kind of know and understand, but then there's also like a monetary value associated with that as well. So he can then go back to these world governments and give them and share these studies with them as to how hunting is actually not just beneficial from a conservation perspective, but it also has a financial impact on their governments as well.
Well, that's really fascinating.
Yeah. So it's amazing. And so when I shared that with her, she was like, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah." I was like, part of the problem is that people don't look at wildlife as having value beyond like, "Oh, look, I saw that bird." You know what I mean? I was like, and like, if that value is gone in that moment, in that instant is the only value that it has for that person, then it becomes a lot easier to dismiss it, right? But if it has a longer term value as a population and as a sustainable food source, as a natural, renewable resource, which is what it is, and get people to think of it more in those terms, all of a sudden it starts to take on a little bit of a different shape and a little bit of a different life that has a little bit more importance. So it was in that instance, I won't say she's going to go out and buy a bow tomorrow. You know what I mean? But it was one of those things where she was like, okay. She's like, I got it. I get you. I hear you. She's like, so I understand how you hunt, and I'm okay with it. And sometimes that's the only part of the battle that you need to win that in that moment. Like, she was okay with me hunting and how I approach it.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people just have a real common misconception of what a hunter is in general, or at least the people that I interact with. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, and we kind of like joked about this in the film, but like I really can't tell you how many times I've had a homeowner that, you know, reached out to me, got to know me, and maybe after 4 months or 6 months or whatever period of time where they're now comfortable with me, they'll just say, to some regard, you know, you're not what I expected.
Yep.
And I'm like, what do you mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then they get all squirmy because they're trying to dance around the fact that they want to say, you're not some redneck wearing, you know, camo overalls that's just out here drinking Budweiser and shooting at everything.
Yep.
And that's what, like, a lot of people have the idea in their mind as what a hunter is. Yep. And I don't really know where that comes from or how that, you know, comes about, but, you know, they don't expect somebody to be, you know, an intelligent, intellectual guy that they're able to have a conversation with. Yep. On many different levels. And there's some people that are opposed to hunting that I have permission to hunt on their properties, and it's because they understand the deer are overpopulated here. There are very few people that have lived here for longer than 6 months that will tell you that we don't have a major deer problem, because it's just, you can't ignore it. It's unavoidable. You know, you cannot drive around and not see deer at night. You cannot talk to people. I mean, I would be willing to bet that not a single property that you could go up and knock on the door of either haven't directly, somebody in that household either directly has had Lyme's disease, or one person removed from them that they know very closely has Lyme's disease. Mm-hmm. Wow. And I mean, every single person that I've talked to has had interactions like that. And it's because of the overpopulation. But, you know, still, they realize that it's a resource that needs to be thinned back because of the damage that they're doing here. They've literally eaten themselves out of house and home. They're just walking around starving.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
I like to blame Elmer Fudd on our stereotype, like, because all he ever wanted to do was kill the wabbit. You know what I mean? So it was. I'm going to blame him, but I'm going to do a hard transition here and get back to some whitetail stuff, because I know you mentioned earlier that, you know, you didn't have anybody to teach you how to hunt. So I'm curious, like, how did you get start hunting, you know, and was the urban hunting kind of born out of necessity, or was that, you know, where you just kind of, you know, cut your teeth hunting? I'm just kind of curious how you got started.
No, so I always loved being outdoors growing up, but I was born and raised in Northern Virginia. So outdoors for me was, I mean, my backyard was about a block away from this stream bed creek system that eventually got to the Potomac River. So my brothers and I grew up spending a lot of time in those woods, you know, playing paintball and just running around and, you know, doing crazy boy stuff when we were younger. But I had never thought about hunting ever. And then my grandfather, when I was like 12 or 13, taught me how to shoot a longbow. My grandfather was one of the, you know, first guys to start hunting with a bow and arrow. And I never put two and two together until I went to college. And my grandfather, unfortunately, was never able to take me hunting, but he was a big deer hunter, you know, back when he was younger. But he was also a smoker, like so many people from 1950s, 1960s, you know, World War II era were. And so by the time I was in college, I realized that I wanted to hunt, and he was nowhere near shape to be able to not be at his house. So I talked to him a lot about hunting, but never the specifics of it, more of just him telling me stories about the good old days when they were hunting in the George Washington National Forest and, you know, shooting deer. One of his buddies had a cabin just on the outskirts of the George Washington National Forest. So I just had a drive to learn how to hunt. And so I looked up, I think it was my sophomore year of college, I looked up the closest hunter education course that I could find. And there was one like 2 days away. It was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday afternoons. So it was from like 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock or whatever the hours were. And I was skipping class to drive the 2 hours each way to take this hunter education course so I could get my license. And then I just went out and hunted public land near my school for the longest time. And so over that time period, I fell in love with deer hunting. And I think it was kind of the combination of the chess match and wanting to learn more. And it was kind of, I'm a sponge. I always want to keep learning things. And on top of that, I think that it meshed well with my love for being outdoors. So I was going out hunting public land that was heavily pressured public land right on the Virginia-West Virginia border. And I was terrible at hunting. And I would occasionally stumble into things and deer, but it took me forever to kill one. And so I read every bit of deer hunting literature that you could find. Books, magazines. I watched all the TV shows. I mean, I think my roommates thought I was crazy by some point. And one of my roommates was a hunter. He grew up hunting with his dad and brother, and they were members at this really nice hunt club that was a couple hours from where we went to college, but they didn't allow guests. So he would go down there and text me all the cool stuff he was seeing or whatever. So yeah, but I just had this drive from inside to learn how to hunt, and I just continued to read books, and then finally I started reading about how deer use topography and learning how they use topo and the wind to their advantage, and that's when I really started actually seeing some deer. And so I hike way back into public land and find these spots, and I'll never forget the first time I shot a deer. I had no clue how to field dress one, and I had photocopied out of a magazine this step-by-step guide to field dress a deer. And it's really funny for me now looking back on that moment.
Dude, this is my favorite part of the whole conversation is right here. I love this.
So I had this Ziploc bag that was crammed down in my pack of this wadded up, folded up, and it'd been in there for hell, it might have been there for a year and a half. I mean, it was forever before I killed a deer. And so it's covered peanut butter and jelly remains and chips and stuff. And so I got this doe laying there, and I laid out with rocks the step-by-step guide, and I followed along step by step. And every incision I made, I was terrified that I was screwing something up. I mean, petrified.
Right.
And it probably took me an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours to field dress that deer. I mean, I didn't have a freaking clue.
Right.
And I'm not that old, but this was before YouTube, so it wasn't like I could watch a video or pull it up on my BlackBerry at the time. I mean, I'm just literally in the middle of the woods, and so I finally got this thing gutted. And I look back on that now. I mean, dude, I could field dress a deer in my sleep.
Right.
I've done, thousands of them, and but it all started there with that. And I mean, I think that ultimately is why I'm so willing to help anyone, because I cut the shit out of my teeth learning how to hunt deer, and anytime that I could help save somebody from having to have a photocopied how-to guide of field dressing a deer, I would highly recommend it. And the funny thing was, now that we're telling this story, I'm pretty sure it was a book that I found in our library in college that I photocopied it from, because I'm pretty sure I had to go put money on my student ID card to use the copying machine.
Right.
But the reason I remember it was the book was from 1975, and so it had these really weird field dressing practices. For example, ball and twine to tie the anal cavity off or something. It's dude, you don't need that. Just rip it out. Yeah. But so I'm there tying a pretty little bow around the colon, before I cut it out. I mean, I literally followed it step by step. It was worse than building anything from IKEA.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But so But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, man, I just always had a drive to hunt. And then so I graduated from college and I moved back here to Northern Virginia. And for me, leaving Northern Virginia wasn't really an option. So I work for my family business. I mean, obviously, everybody has an option to go wherever they want, but
Right.
I wanted to come here and work with the family. So what I would do is I would work all day, Monday through Friday. We were really strict with the time off allowed, and especially as a new employee, and
Right.
daddy is the owner. You're not gonna
get a bunch of time off. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
For sure. So I think I got my butt worked harder than anybody else.
That's usually how it works.
Yeah. But so we had a military installation that is not too far from it was about 30 minutes from where I was living at the time. And they allowed hunting if you went through the whole, a bunch of processes, background check, proficiency test, qualifications stuff.
Right.
So I had permission to hunt there. So I would go down there on Saturday morning at like 4:00 in the morning, and I would pick my spot, and I would go into that area, and I would sit there all day long. I would not leave the tree, and that was my Saturday hunt. And in Virginia at the time, Sunday hunting was illegal, so that was my only day to hunt. And if it rained or shined, it did not matter. I was spending all day in that tree. And that's really where the kind of urban hunting came about, because I would drive down to this place and I'd hike a couple miles back into the training area. I'd sit there all day. I'd maybe see a couple deer, maybe I wouldn't. And I'd drive home, and every time I'm driving through the urban areas, I see a bunch of deer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, after about a year of hunting like that, of driving past deer to see no deer, I just kept thinking, there's got to be a better way to go about this. There's got to be a better way for me to hunt these deer that I'm seeing in Mrs. Smith's backyard every afternoon.
Right.
Rather than the military base that really doesn't need that many deer hunted, because there's so many people there that are hunting them already.
Right.
So, I ended up meeting a guy who is now a great friend of mine, who was hunting the suburbs, and he kind of showed me the ropes, and it was like everything came into line, and it was perfect. I mean, I was able to drive a couple minutes. I had all this property at my disposal. After some time, I mean, at first it was one property. It was my grandmother's bridge friend. And then,
nice.
And I just, hunted at her place, and then she told a couple of her buddies about me, and then she told a couple of friends, and it just kind of snowballed from there into a plethora of properties. But, it really felt right to be in an area where there are a lot of deer, you're seeing plenty of deer, and you're helping people out by thinning them out. So,
nice.
It really worked out well. So that was kind of the super long-winded version of.
No, I love it, man. Like I was saying, I was getting a visualization of you with all your pieces of paper out while you were gutting that deer.
Brutal, man. I had this shitty old Walmart field line pack that the zipper was all busted on, and I had the Ziploc bag that had that. I can vividly remember that because I kept my knife in there and I didn't know this at the time, but I bought those field dressing gloves, which are basically like cattle prod gloves,
Yeah.
And so it was all in that little kill kit, and when I pulled it out, I laid it all out perfectly. I mean, it looked like Dexter in the woods there with all the paper and the rocks. And it's just, it's so funny thinking about that now. Because
I mean, you don't even think about stuff like that, right? I mean, after you've been hunting for a while, but like for me, it's like I grew up in the country, you know what I mean? Just, there were more wildlife, or there was more, cattle and farm animals around than there were people, where I lived. And, grew up hunting from the time since I can basically remember. I was always kind of in the woods with my dad or whatever, and then eventually started hunting, once I, became old enough to legally hunt and so forth. And I remember my dad gutting my first deer to show me how, but I had seen him gut others, you know what I mean? And that was basically like the tutorial that I got. And then from there, it was like I was, was on my own. And it's like, and it's one of those things that like, I just never even thought of like, how would someone figure this out? Because I'm just like, you just gut the deer. You know what I mean?
Just do it.
Yeah. And it didn't ever dawn on me until I guess 2 years ago, right? I was out in Ohio hunting a piece of public land and I killed a nice deer. And I had never caped one out, to take to a taxidermist, like, because I'd never had like a full mount done before, you know what I mean? So like, and that was when it dawned on me, because I was like, I've never done this before. Like, I've never had to figure out how to cape it out without ruining the hide to take to a taxidermist. So it's like, I literally had to get on YouTube and like watch videos like to where I need to make all the incisions to get all the meat out, so I could then take the head off to take it to the taxidermist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, fortunately, I didn't have printouts necessarily required for this one, but that was the moment that it dawned on me. I was like, man, there are some people that just like the process of gutting one and getting it out of the woods is like foreign to them. You know what I mean? And that just is a good point of like, man, when someone needs your help that wants to learn how to hunt, like give them a hand, man, because this stuff isn't second nature.
Yeah. Well, it's really funny. So I took that deer. I was so proud of that deer.
Yeah.
And
hell yeah.
So one of the things in that book that I photocopied, it said to remove the rear tarsal glands because it will ruin the meat. So I'm like, well, shit, I gotta get those off right now.
Like right away. Yeah.
Right. And so, but when I photocopied it with the black and white, it was really hard to tell what the tarsal gland was. And so I didn't know what the hell I'm doing. So I'm like, okay, rear tarsal gland. So I'm looking on the back and I can kind of see the spot that they're looking at on the black and white photo. So I just went in there and cut the entire rear tarsal gland off with the Achilles tendon. Okay. So I drag, like I don't have a freaking clue what I'm doing, but I'm like, So I drag this deer to the butcher, and I'm like Mr. City Boy with his deer pulling up to the country butcher, and because where I went to school was in the middle of nowhere, and so I pull up, and thank God the dude who I unloaded the deer to at the butcher shop was really cool, and he was like kind of looking at me. He goes, "You kill a lot of these? You do a lot of hunting?" I was like, "Oh man, this is my first deer. Like I'm super excited. I don't know like what to get for the meat stuff." And he's like, "Let me show you something." And he pulled the doe's leg up. He's like, "You see where this was?" He's like, shows another deer carcass thing there. He's like, "See how we hang them?" He's like, "When you do that, we can't hang them up on our thing here." And I was like, "Oh my God." And I mean, thankfully he was so cool about it, because if he had shamed me, I don't know what I would have done.
Right. Yeah. That dude is a saint, kind of, right? Because because that conversation and outcome could have gone, a completely different way, which would have made it, I won't say tough for you to go back and hunt again, but it's like, it really kind of like you're on this high of like, I got my first deer. This is awesome. I recognize I don't really know exactly what I'm doing, but man, I am pumped. And all you like, it would be terrible if someone came along and like just pissed on your parade because you didn't know how to like gut it the first time. You know what I mean? It's like, it could have been really damaging, where it's like, man, I don't want to do that again. You know what I mean? Where, as opposed to just saying, "Hey man," I mean, that was really cool of him to just say, "Hey, this is how you want to do this." So
and,
that way, you
see some people doing that nowadays. Kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier with like hunter recruitment or people coming into hunting. It's not up to you what somebody else shoots.
Yep,
right.
100%.
So if you're at a hunt club or a managed property or whatever, and there's some kid there and he's tickled to death with the little 100-inch basket rack 1.5-year-old 8-pointer that would have been a monster in 4 years, like, dude, that kid's happy. Let him be happy.
Let him do it. Right.
Let people shoot what they're comfortable with and what they want to harvest, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. I have some buddies who've told me horror stories from their hunt clubs, or like, yeah, this guy like yelled at the 12-year-old kid and made him cry while they're standing around the meat pole. I'm like, why, man?
Oh man, it's funny that we're talking about this, because I literally just had this conversation with my father-in-law. They were in town for the holidays and stuff, and I don't hunt up much anymore. We have a family farm in like South Central Pennsylvania. Probably not too awful far. Actually, it's probably about 2 hours from you. It's up around Bedford, Pennsylvania.
Sounds good, man. I'd love to come up. Thanks.
Yeah, dude, for sure. Like, not a problem. Actually, we could probably make that happen. But we've done some property management on it and stuff. We've put some food plots in and stuff like that over the past couple of years. It's been in his family for, good Lord, I don't know. That's the only property he's ever hunted growing up. Like, and he's in his 60s, so it's been in his family like 60 some years. He's been hunting it probably 40 some.
That's cool.
And we have a cabin on it and stuff like that. There's no structure on it other than the cabin that he built. It's basically just like we go down there and hunt. And I haven't really hunted it very much like the past. I don't think I hunted it at all this year. I hunted it once or twice, I think, last year. But we did some food plot, updates to it and did some timber cuts and stuff like that and trying to get, the deer herd into like a good place because it's in a part of Pennsylvania where there's a lot of hunting pressure, a lot of gun hunting and stuff like that where you're going to be hard pressed to grow decent deer, or I shouldn't say grow, allow deer to age to a point where you're going to have, like that property, put it this way. If you get a Pope and young deer on that property, that's a good deer. Like that's a deer that you probably shouldn't pass. You know what I mean? Cause I've only ever really seen one or two. I've only ever seen 1 4.5-year-old on the property all the years I've hunted it. But anyway, we were talking about this, the whole, what you shoot, what you don't shoot and how people feel about it the other night, because, it's like he's killed a lot of deer and he's, an older fella and he grew up in that era where you just, if something runs by you, you shoot it, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, doesn't, and that's fine. I don't hunt that way. And so whenever I started hunting there, it's like, I would pass deer, and especially since we were doing some updates to the property, it's like, I'd pass deer and try to let deer get some age on it and stuff like that. And, which he wasn't really for at first. And then it finally dawned on him, I guess, last year where, there was one really nice buck, and I had an encounter with him the year before, and I'll make this brief because people have heard this story. I watched him for 2 years. I had a couple encounters with him as a 3.5-year-old. Just couldn't quite get a shot opportunity, and I knew the deer like the back of my hand. In the opening day of last year, I had him at 30 yards because I knew exactly where he was going to be, and he was there. He came in with a couple other deer, and one deer got spooky, and they didn't blow out of there. They just turned around and walked the opposite way. And then my buddy ended up shooting him during gun season. And that was the only 4.5-year-old deer I'd ever seen. But there was probably 4 other really nice up and comer deer on that property that all got shot during gun season, and which was great. All the guys, killed during rifle season and stuff like that. And we were kind of talking about it a little bit, and he was talking and like projecting to the next year. And I said, you just need to be careful, whenever you're like, when you're during deer season or during buck season or rifle season specifically, if you don't have if you want to have certain caliber of deer, you need to kind of put parameters in place for everyone to hunt with. I was like, because all your up and comers are gone now. You know what I mean? I was like, because, and that's okay. I was like, but you just need to understand that means there's probably going to be a year, maybe a 2-year drought where you're not going to have probably what you're looking for. Right. And he got it. And he was like, yeah, he's like, you're right. We should probably talk about that. And I was like, yeah. And so he talked to the guys about it or whatever. And this year, fast forward, he passed a shooter 8, that was probably a borderline shooter, but he's killed bigger deer. And so he let it walk. And so did 2 of the other guys. And one of the guys there got mad because they passed him because he didn't see any deer during the hunt. He's like, well, I wouldn't have passed that. And what I had told him was, I was like, look, just as, I should never tell her, and nobody should ever tell someone what they should shoot. Right. And shouldn't shame them if they shoot something smaller than what you would shoot, because it's not right. And it's not your hunt. So don't worry about it. I was like, but the inverse is also true. I was like, is just because they would be happy to shoot something doesn't mean that I shouldn't change what my goals are because it might offend them. You know, I was like, because, that also is not cool. I was like, everyone should have the opportunity to hunt what they want to hunt. And if, he's the property owner. I was like, if you want it hunted a certain way and they don't want, and someone doesn't want to hunt it the same way you want to hunt it, I was like, then they don't have to hunt there. You know what I mean? I was like, and it's not a personal thing. It's just, you have a standard. And if they don't like it, they don't, they can hunt the adjacent property, whatever the case is. Right. I was like, but this whole idea that people try to bestow on to other people what their criteria or what their goals should be is just kind of asinine in my opinion.
Yeah, your goals are your goals. They're not my goals.
Yeah.
I mean, and everybody with a tag in their pocket has the right to take a legal deer, whatever that is in that area. And so, I mean, for somebody to get mad at the new hunter who might be 12 or might be 25 or 35, for shooting a, little forkhorn that walked by. I mean, I understand the management practices. I have a couple properties that are not in an urban setting that I hunt where I'm really strict on what we shoot. And I've passed a lot of deer that people think, I'm crazy about for passing. And it's because if I put an arrow in that deer, it can't get any bigger. That's guaranteed.
Right. That's 100%, man.
And if I don't put an arrow in that deer, then we're going to see what happens next year. Or maybe somebody else will shoot him. And if they do, good for them. It'll make them really happy. And, they'll put him on their wall forever. And that's cool. But, I know for certain what will not happen if I shoot that deer. And, now that being said, in the suburbs, I mean, I have a completely different kind of mission, and that is to reduce the deer as much as possible. And that's just because the first step to getting that deer herd where it needs to be for health perspectives, for the herd health, not human health, but it is reduced drastically. And by the numbers that we're currently at, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to do the math. That's like, hey, we need to start whacking and stacking big time.
Right.
And
so I want to touch on that a little bit, just like the I guess the quality, or I guess more specifically the urban hunting. Because I know we've been kind of dancing around it a little bit, but I'm just curious, man. Like, what is the, like, I guess what is the, no other way to say it. What is the quality of deer that you're looking at? I mean, do you have some places in those urban settings where you have, like decent bucks? Is there like a honey hole somewhere where you have that you're like, man, I know I'm whacking and stacking, but every year there seems to be a hammer that lives in this area?
Yeah, I mean, we have the handful like 160s, 170s running around. No, I'm just messing. No, so I mean, it's weird because what we don't have is we don't have the browse that the deer need to get nutrients to get up there. Right. However, I have a lot of cameras. I have a lot of properties I hunt. I run a lot of trail cameras. I probably am running anywhere. I probably have like 50 trail cameras out right now, give or take a few. So that means I probably have 65, but 15 are in various stages of disrepair at any
given time.
Yeah, but I'm really anal about checking cameras because I try to be as efficient as possible. So I'm always trying to figure out where the deer are, and with the urban deer, the deer tend to be kind of nomadic, and we'll get off on that tangent later. But as far as the quality of deer, we have a lot of older deer because nothing kills them other than cars or old age.
Right.
So very regularly, or not, well, I take that back. Every season, you'll have pictures of a couple just absolute hammers. And in this area, a hammer would be like a, mid to upper 150, low 160 class deer.
Right.
But I mean, we have, or in this area, I have plenty of trail camera pictures of deer that you would pay really good money to go shoot somewhere in the Midwest.
Right.
The problem is I don't have 600, 700, 800 acres to pattern that deer's entire home range on,
right?
Or the majority of his range. I can't tell you all the different beds he's bedding in. I can't tell you all his different food sources. I mean, you have to almost wipe the slate clean when you're hunting in the suburbs because the food source might be something that you never thought of.
Yeah.
For example, it might be the hydrangea plant next door at Mrs. Peterson's house that she's put a bunch of fertilizer on that's neon green that the deer really like the taste of, as opposed to, whatever other ornamental bush is you're hunting over the back of. So, we have high quality deer here, but they're very hard to shoot outside of the rut just because of that's how hard they are to pattern. Now, when we have years with a low oak mast, I just have enough properties where inevitably I'll have one or two properties where I have a white oak or two that are dropping. I tend to see really good bucks that time of year because they will move to get on those oaks. Outside of that, I'm pretty much hunting does year round, because even when it's that magical late October, early November timeframe, you want to be where the does are to find the bucks. So, right. But yeah, I mean, I have plenty of deer on my wall here that are killed in the suburbs that I think anybody would be proud of to shoot anywhere. You know, plenty of, 130, mm-hmm. low 140 type deer. So yeah. I would say that if you put in the time, you could kill a 135 to 140 inch deer every year here in the burbs.
Right.
So,
yeah. I was just curious, man, because like this year was the first year that I've done some suburbia type hunting. So I live north of Philadelphia, Bucks County area. So it's like once you get out further into Bucks County, you do get into like some farm-esque kind of country. So it's not house on top of house. It's more like like small developments here and there with like mm-hmm. A farm in between type of thing. So it's suburbs in comparison to where I grew up, but it's probably not the type of suburbs you're necessarily talking about. Like, there'll be like a person might have a half acre and then the next door neighbor might have 5, and then the other neighbor might have 10, you know what I mean? So it's a little bit bigger lots, but I ended up getting similar type of thing. There's a program that I joined that was all about thinning the deer herd, because again, they're eating people's bushes. There's a lot more deer than the land in the area has the ability to carry. You walk into like some of these areas that are forested, it's like the understory is pretty much like wiped clean, so on and so forth. And there was a swamp that I ended up getting access on, and I hung a camera in there. It's small parcel, well, small in comparison for a piece of public land. I think it's like 25 acres. I did my first camera pull like right before the season started this year. It comes in like mid-September here in the eastern part of the PA, and had a legit 150. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. It was like a legit mainframe, like perfectly symmetrical 10-point. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And then I kind of kept flipping through. And there was like, there's a mid 130, there's another 130. I had legitimately 5 shooters on this one camera, like in this small little piece of swamp in this, in this neighborhood. So I was real stoked. Now the funny thing was like they were around. I kept missing them. I actually saw one of them from the tree. I saw one on the hoof. He heard me getting into the tree. It was really weird too, because it might have been the beginning of October, mm-hmm. and he heard me getting into the tree. Actually, it might have been right before October. It might have been just the end of September, and he heard me kind of scraping the tree as I was getting into it. And I think he thought it was a deer, and they're messing with the tree or whatever. And he just got curious and started walking down toward me and like stopped and was looking around. He couldn't see me because I heard him. I stopped, and he just kind of looked around and didn't see anything, so he just turned around and went the opposite way. But I was like, man, I could get into some suburbia hunting. I was like,
it's pretty awesome.
It's just super. It's super cool, man. Like it's, I mean, I'm similar to you. It's like, work a normal job, live outside the city. I work in the city every day, so I commute in every day. And Pennsylvania has Saturday only hunting, or on the weekends, there's no Sunday hunting. And all my family property is like 3 to 3.5 hours away from me, the couple of different properties that we have back home. And so I can't necessarily get in and run back to hunt for like a day, especially if the weather's not going to be good or whatever. It's like, so I just started hunting around here, and the suburb hunting, man, has been great, man. It's like, I look forward to doing more of it. So that was why I was just curious if you're seeing, decent deer, but what you said about being able to pattern them is the pain, because I literally at one point in the season, like completely lost them. Like they've just vanished, and I've not seen them probably since, man, I think like October 27th was like the last like inventory I had. And then one shooter showed up, like, I want to say it was like November 27th or something like that. But other than that, it's been a ghost town in there. So
yeah, it's funny. I mean, the urban hunting is great. It's funny because it's a completely different style of hunting than deep woods hunting.
Yep.
But it's the same in some regard. I mean, you're climbing a tree. There are a lot of aspects as far as like playing the wind and all that. But it's so cool to watch how these deer have adapted to living with humans and living with the human presence. And I have a lot of properties that are very small, that maybe half acre chunk of woods, where one in particular that comes to mind, there's a playground in the backyard of the neighbors, and so the kids will be out there playing really loud, and I'll watch deer be 50 yards from these kids in their playground, and their swing set or whatever, and they're just watching the kids, and the kids have no idea the deer are there. And then when the kids go inside, the deer get up and start moving around, and they just know that they know the routines of everything that's around them. And, I get that question a lot. They're like, oh man, don't you get tired of like killing these easy fish in a barrel type canned hunts? I'm like, dude,
yeah.
Hunting a deer in the suburbs is just as hard, if not harder, than hunting a deer in the regular big woods. Like, it's not, I'm not sitting here just shooting the first 5 deer that walk by and then going home. They know the second that you cross that bubble outside of normal daily life, and they will, avoid that area. The other thing that I find really interesting is I think that, I've come to realize that because the browse is so just overbrowsed and just unavailable for the most part, the deer tend to work on this nomadic circuit, or this like big circle where they'll kind of roam through the neighborhood looking for food. And, I'll get them on camera 3-4 days in a row, then they'll be gone for maybe 5, and then they'll be back. But it's not like a normal farm where you would have, this is the bedding area. This is the feeding area. On a south wind, we're going to hunt here, and you will see 35 does, or, you really have to time it right, which is why I am so anal about the cameras, is I want to get in front of that cycle, not behind it. So, if I pull a card and I see that the deer have been gone for 4 days and then they were in there yesterday, I'm hunting that tomorrow, because they'll probably be there. Or if I see they haven't been there for 4 or 5 days, but previously it was a 4 or 5 day lull between when they were there and when they weren't, I'll go hunt that spot 2 days in a row, or, and then once I hunt a spot, I'll hunt it maybe 2-3 times in a row and then roll out, and I'll let it rest for a while, because, pressure is what is pushing these deer around, and the deer are getting pressured all day, every day, whether it be, the UPS driver coming down the street, or the kids running through the floodplain, or, whatever it is, or the neighbor's dog chasing them. They're trying to avoid that pressure, and I don't want, that's what that pressure has pushed them into that property that I'm hunting them on. And what I'm trying to do is thin them out, not just push them off that property to another spot to where I can't thin them out. So, it's important to try and play it smart and hunt intelligently. And, urban deer are no different than any other deer for that work.
Yeah, man. It's just, you have a different set of circumstances that make it challenging, right? It's like if you're in a bigger woods setting, it's like, yes, you have more space, right, that they could hide in potentially, right? But you also have the opportunity to hunt them more, I won't say more aggressively, but you can hunt them in more places, right? So there's a downside, but there's also a benefit. They'll probably likely, at least my experience is like, I can kind of figure out what they're doing in terms of a pattern, because their food source is consistent, their bedding is consistent, because what the pressure is going to be in those places, right? Like, especially if you own it or whatever, and you keep pressure off of it, you can kind of get a sense of, this is the destination food, this is their primary bedding, early season, this is going to be their pattern, right? Here are the doe family groups where they bed during rut, here are the funnels that kind of connect the two, connect all those things. You can kind of play all those, typical scenarios to your advantage. It's like what I've found, which is challenging, is that all the things you had mentioned, right? So the food sources are constantly changing. So it's not like the food source changes like with the season necessarily, how you would suspect, or how you would kind of hunt it for, from early season to, to pre-rut, whenever, acorns are dropping, to late season, wherever you're not hunting that type of transition, because the food sources are abundant in some cases, or not, and then wildly diverse, and there's not really a rhyme or a reason as to why they're going to the place that they're going to eat, maybe other than because that spot is the spot that's not pressured, or they're not getting run off by the neighbor's dog, like you'd mentioned. The other thing that I ran into was like literally some dude walking his dog down through the wood, or down through this little piece of timber like 30 yards from my stand. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not like he's out hiking, he's just taking his dog to go take a leak on a Saturday afternoon.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
I've seen plenty of stuff like that.
Yeah. And I'm like, and I just sit there and watch. It's like, I don't get mad about it, because I'm like, dude has every right to be here too. It's behind his house. He's got no clue I'm here, and it's just like, and that's the other thing. It's like, the pressure is not just hunting pressure. It's like you mentioned, it's everything pressure. It's like they're constantly surrounded by people. I do think though, what I did notice, I'd be curious to get your opinion on this too, because you've been doing the urban thing, a lot longer than I have. I do think that at some points it makes the deer a little more curious living in that environment. I think that they're just a slight bit more curious because they've had encounters that weren't completely negative.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, look, in the big woods environment, most of the time that deer have encountered humans, it's a negative encounter. Right. Whether that be just by the sheer fact that they don't encounter humans that often.
Yep.
But here, I mean, like where I live, I have a chunk of woods behind my house, and that I hunt in, and I've seen deer bedded back there that'll watch me come out on my back deck with my dog, and they'll stay bedded, and they'll turn around, they'll watch my dog, and they'll watch where he goes. And if he just goes to the edge of our yard and pees, they don't care. If he runs to his first poop spot that's like 5 yards into the woods, they don't care. But the second that he catches a little whiff of them and breaks that line, they're off.
Yep.
Right. But they know the routines, and I think they are curious. What's really kind of creepy to me is those same deer that kind of live in my backyard, they tend to come out into my yard when I'm grilling venison.
He's like, hey, you're cooking up Bob today.
Like,
nice.
Hey, Sue, is that you? Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's up with that. I don't know if it's like a familiar aroma to that. I mean, clearly it is, but it's just meat, and it's not like it's giving off any specific.
Did you throw that tarsal gland on there by accident?
Yeah. You're not supposed to eat that? The guy at the butcher shop told me it was great.
He said it was great as a garnish. Like,
yeah.
Like we have a guest there, you always give them the tarsal gland. Yeah.
I wonder why nobody came back for a second dinner date with my wife and I.
Right. So I want to ask you, man. As we were talking about, we encounter a lot of the same things when we hunt the urban areas and suburbia, and there's different challenges that present themselves as we had talked about. I'm curious if you see them react similarly to weather events as we would in larger woods or like a farm setting. So like, do you see similar things, or deer do similar things, or movement wise, whether whenever you have a high pressure day, or whether there's a front or a backside of a cold front, or or just if there's just a little bit of light precip, or like the wind being like 5 to 10 to 15 miles per hour, anything over that they don't like, but like in that range, it's like they're really comfortable and they'll like to move. Do you see any differences there, or do you see kind of the same thing in both places?
So I see it's bizarre. I take notes on everything because I'm always trying to improve on my hunting. I mean, I'd love to go out and just, be the most efficient predator I can be. Right. And I'm always blown away by what makes deer move. So I'd say about 80% of the time I get movement that's textbook. Like textbook what you would read in anything as far as, moon's overhead, moon's underfoot, barometric pressure is high or the pressure is falling. I see deer feeding all the time. However, there will be times where I drive by, a field on my way home, and there'll be 30 deer in it, and you're like, okay, why are they there right now?
Right.
Well, it's hot, the moon's not doing anything, and the pressure's at like 28 and a half. Mm-hmm. I'm like, why are they there? Mm-hmm. There's no reason for them to be there. So my best guess is that something else has pushed them there, and they just happen to be up feeding then. Right. So like, let's say some dog ran through, or a coyote ran through and blew them out into a field, or for whatever reason you just happen to see a ton of deer. I just think there's so many extra factors that come into play that I'm not aware of that contributes to them moving, and that kind of really taints all of my data to some degree, because then theoretically if they're moving then why didn't that extracurricular factor cause them to move when I thought it was a traditional quote unquote thing. So,
right. Yeah.
But to that, I mean, I still try to pick weather events on days that I hunt. So now that my Bambino is here, she's 6 months old.
Nice. Congrats, man.
Yeah, thanks. It is pretty awesome. Father's Day morning, actually, my wife gave birth. So, but you know, it's funny. I was talking to one of my buddies the other day, and I was like, dude, this sucks. You know, I can't hunt at all this year. And he's like, well, what are you talking about, dude? You're hunting a bunch. And I was like, no, I can only hunt 3 days a week. And he was like, F you, dude.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? He goes, seriously, man? He's like, people would give their left nut to be able to hunt that much, and you're complaining about it.
Exactly.
And he's like, you're going to get 160, 175 hunts in this year.
Yep.
And yeah, it's just one of those things where it's all relative.
Yep.
And, you know, to me, if I'm used to hunting every day or hunting in the morning, going to work for a little bit, and come back hunting in the afternoon on, you know, days where we have a lot of sun or whatever, you know, that's one thing. And then for me to have to restrict that to what I'm thinking of as only 3 days a week and trying to pick the right weather events is kind of funny. But
right.
So what I've done is I've been looking at the different weather patterns. So I always look for changes in temperature from the previous day or previous couple days. Those are a huge thing for me to want to get in the woods. So if it's, you know, 60 and then tomorrow morning it's gonna be 35 and the pressure's high, that's huge for me. Like I'm circling that on my calendar. Or you know, high barometric pressure events, or any day where the moon is overhead or underfoot within the last couple hours of the day, or, you know, within the first couple hours of the day, I'll hunt that period as well. So those tend to work out really well for me, and I think those are the pretty standard traditional you know, hunting triggers, if you will.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for me this year, this was actually the first year that I was able to follow the weather as much as I could. Just because this is the first year I really had a property that was, you know, within 20 minutes of my house. So I'd take like, you know, a half day at work, where I'd work from home in the morning and then take a half day and then go hunt the evening or whatever. And so I was able to follow some weather patterns and stuff like that. The unfortunate thing was that I kind of saw the same thing as you, is that the majority of the stuff, you know, those you know, trigger events, you know, temp, barometric pressure, etc., like all those things kind of fell into place, and I saw the movement you would suspect. It always just seemed to happen the second day. So there would be a big weather change, like a 10, 15 degree drop. You know what I mean? The first day I would go hunt it. I would see maybe a couple does or whatever. And then the next day, I wouldn't hunt, you know, because the temp maybe raised by 5 degrees or 4 degrees or whatever. And then the second day was whenever I would have the deer on camera. So it was one of those things where I was losing the cat and mouse game on that one, but it was holding true. Like whenever the weather events hit, they were definitely moving, but it just seemed to be, not saying they didn't move the first day, they just weren't moving near me the first day, you know. So
that's interesting. I mean, what I tend to look for is and I've had the most success on the first day of that weather system coming through, but I also want there to be the higher the cloud cover, the higher the barometric pressure relative to the day prior, and the higher the wind speed, I find the better movement. And I've actually read some studies where there's a direct correlation between higher wind speed and higher deer movement. That's contradictory to everything that I've read growing up. But I've read a couple of things lately that say that. So I'm testing it out, although I'm not super inclined to be in a tree when it's over like 25 miles an hour. I'm a big dude. I'm 6'3" and 240 pounds. So that's a big pinata getting pushed around at the top of a little tree. So.
Right. Actually, I had someone, I can't think who it was. I had someone on the podcast that actually we were talking about the same thing, where they were talking about the wind speed that's optimal for deer movement is actually a lot higher than what people would think. I think they were saying like the optimal wind speed, like a lot of people want to hunt those like 5 mile per hour kind of days or whatever, but they were like actually like the 10 to 15, even getting close to 20 is is when you'll see a lot of deer movement, you know?
Yeah. The person that I was talking to about this, they were like, well, imagine this, if your best defense is your nose, wouldn't you want it windier? And I was like, well, To some extent, yes, but at some point, doesn't the wind diminish my ability to smell a predator?
Yeah, I would say it's like, and how I kind of thought of it was that as long as it was consistent, right? You were getting a consistent win, I think is what they would like. And I don't know this to be true, but like if I'm just thinking about it academically, I would think as long as the wind and I'm getting a true wind, then I would want a higher wind because yes, I'm presume that it's bringing more scent to me from further away, because it's traveling faster. It's like that would be my rationale. If it's swirling though, and it's kind of going, like say a nor'easter kind of blows through or whatever, and you're hunting like the backside of something that blew through, it's like maybe not because that wind is just unpredictable. You know what I mean? And that would be an instance where I would think maybe it wouldn't bode well for the deer. But I'm of course just making all this up on the spot right now. So
yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of good movement in the lower. I mean, what I'll try to do is get out of that wind into a lower area.
Yep.
and hunt it. And I mean, to your point, on days where there's a consistent wind, or even if it's a little swirly, then I've seen good movement. It's been more of me getting out of the tree as opposed to,
Right.
hanging tough.
Yeah.
Actually, this year, one of the better days, and it was like November 5th or 6th, we had 25 to 30 mile an hour winds with gusts up to like 60, 50 or 60. It was a front was blowing through, and we were all about it. And then we're sitting in a tree, and the second tree that smashed down near me, I was like, F this, I'm out. Just like, I sent a text. I'm like, dude, I'm not hunting it when there's giant branches and stuff blowing out of the tree.
Yeah, that gets
it's not worth it.
Yeah, man, it just gets a little dicey. I actually had one fall, what was it, 2 years ago, I think, snap off maybe like 40 yards from me, like a huge tree just ate it. The whole thing came down. Yeah, and I was just like, it was one of those things where I watched it happen, like it was almost happening in slow motion, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. And then, yeah, I promptly got down, changed my pants, and and went home and was like, yeah, I think I'm good on that. But I want to shift gears here just for a second and talk a little bit about saddle hunting, because we haven't even touched on the idea of saddle hunting yet. I know that you are a hardcore saddle hunter, if I'm not mistaken. That's your primary method of getting it done. I just started saddle hunting this year for the first go round, and I gotta say, man, it's only deer I killed this year was out of a saddle. It was one of my very early sits too. It was I think the very end of September, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess I want to ask, first questions first, is how long have you been saddle hunting?
So I am a diehard saddle hunter. I started saddle hunting in 2008, and I couldn't tell you the last time I sat in a traditional stand. I'd have to think about it. It's probably about a year ago. And I mean, I can't. I have trouble sitting in a regular tree stand now. I feel completely exposed, and it is super uncomfortable compared to a saddle for me. Saddles are a phenomenal way to hunt, but I think the learning curve is a little steep on them, so it takes a little while to get used to it. Plus, I think it's an awkward feeling to be hanging from a rope and having that reinforcement of weight in your butt hiked out over your platform. So it's kind of like a leap of faith or a hang of faith. But once you get a hang of that, no pun intended, and
Right.
once you get, you're confident in your system, and you realize, how many benefits there are to saddle hunting, I find it really hard to go back to hunting from anything but a saddle. So, I mean, for me, I started saddle hunting when I'd moved back to the area and was hunting on that military base, because I would hike way back in. I'd find these, little topographic features way back in the middle of nowhere, and then I'd hike back there with my GPS, and I'd find that spot, and then I'd hunt there. But what was happening what was happening to me was I'd hike all the way back in, I'd find a spot, I'd have my climber with me, and then I wouldn't be able to find a tree I could climb. And then I'd start looking around with my flashlight up into all the trees, and eventually I'd find a spot that was like 40 yards from the area I'd located on the map, and then deer would come through, maybe 60 yards away or whatever. But if I'd been able to climb a tree in that exact spot, I would have been able to kill deer. So the guy who had gotten me into urban hunting is also a saddle hunter. And so I saw his saddle. He showed it to me, and I was like, dude, that's the coolest thing ever. I'd never seen one before. It was the saddle that he had was the trophy line saddle, and that was the only one that they made for the longest time, the tree saddle. And I went home that night. I bought one on eBay. I had no idea that the company was out of business and how hard they'd be to find.
Nice.
And it came in, and I just, played around with it and got used to it. And so from there, I've owned various saddles, and then, was really happy that I got to team up with Tethered and some other guys and really, help iron out the prototype and work with different prototypes and make suggestions and ultimately get to where we are with the Tethered Mantis and the Predator platform. For anybody who hasn't, check that out. Definitely look at the Tethered saddle and the platform that Tethered makes as well, because that was the age-old problem with saddle hunting was, you have this saddle. Okay, this is a better way to hunt. We get it. You can't fall out. It's lighter. You can hunt any tree, blah, blah, blah. But what do you do with your feet? Yeah, that was the hardest thing. And, people were using those Ameristep steps, but they'd been discontinued since the early 2000s. They're really hard to find. And, still with the steps, your knees go into the tree and you have a flat point of contact at some spot on your foot that will ultimately create a hot spot or, a contact point. So that platform is just a super game changer, and it's really even changed the way that I hunt, because what I used to do is I would prep trees. So, I'd guess anywhere between 200, 250 trees. No, that's not right. I probably had 75 or 80 trees that I had sticks in, ready to climb a couple of years ago, and with the screw-in steps all around the top. So all I did was climb up, be ready to go.
Right.
Well, for me, I'd rather be mobile, but it's just kind of a pain in the ass if I'm going to go in for a quick hunt. So now that Predator platform is out, I can go in and just take my Wild Edge steps and just go up any tree I want. And I have a bunch that are prepped. I probably have over 1,000, closer to 1,100 trees right now. Jeez. Prepped to climb within a 15-minute drive of my house to hunt from. And so I don't need to worry about all those steps, because what happened was when I was using all these different ladder sections, over time, maybe I wouldn't hunt a spot for 6 months or, somewhere out there for 3 or 4 years. And then I'd climb up, I realized they're all rusty, the straps are bad. I just would rather not have to deal with that. And so if I can just mark a tree on my Onyx with my little thumbtack,
right,
and then I know to come back to it, I use 5 Wild Edge steps with an aider. I can get up any tree in it takes 5 minutes, and I'm up at the top, and then I film all my hunts, so it'll take me 15 minutes to set up all my camera gear. But
right,
that system for me with that platform is just a total game changer. And I'm not trying to plug all this crap. It's just I'm a complete gear nut, and so I've tried everything, and I'm really critical of my gear when I play around and test with stuff. And so this is what I've found over literally hundreds and hundreds of hunts to work the best for me. And I think one of the things that I really prefer is I know the area that the deer are going to come through for the most part. But what I want to do is I want to keep the deer guessing as to where the danger is. So I will always hunt, I might be hunting the same kill spot but I'll hunt 5 different trees all around it, or 8 different trees all around it, or however many trees I need to hunt around it. But I want the deer to keep guessing. There's so many places that I hunt that I might not have sole permission on, where a guy has a tree stand hung. I killed a big buck this year doing this. A deer came in and stopped, and for 5 minutes, maybe longer, was looking up at a hang-on tree stand that I was 12 yards from, and stared a hole through that tree stand. And finally, once he realized that hunter wasn't there, he walked in and I killed him.
Right.
And, I was 12 yards away, but I was on the other side of where that deer was coming in from, and he had no clue I was there.
Yep.
And, when I'm hunting, I'm always I'll kill a couple deer out of that tree, and then I'm going to hunt a different tree. And I won't hunt that same tree for a year or maybe longer, because I just don't want them to know, especially when they're herded up. Like right now, I'll get 8, 10, 12 deer to come through. I'm only able to kill one of them. Then I'll pick off another one, when they don't realize what happened. But they realize that area has danger associated with it, and they'll pick out that tree eventually, and then they'll just avoid the area altogether. And that's what I don't want.
Right. Yeah. No, I hear you, man. I actually, I used tethered this year as well. That's what I ended up hunting out of. Greg is aces, man. Good dude. Had him on the show. Actually, he's getting ready to come back on the show. Just awesome guy. Killer product, like you mentioned. The Predator platform for me was the game changer. For me, it was being I guess something familiar, right? Because coming from hunting out of a tree stand, it's like that platform just allowed me to have enough of a transition that was familiar.
Yeah, it bridges the gap really kind of between like hardcore saddle hunting and what you're familiar with traditionally.
Right, exactly. And what you mentioned being mobile, that's like, I don't have any prepped trees anywhere. I hunt that piece of public swamp, and then everything I hunt in Ohio is all public. Even the family property that I have, it's like I don't really have any trees prepped there necessarily either. So everything for me is a hang and hunt pretty much every set. And that saddle was kind of instrumental in that. And then whenever I was in Ohio, it allowed me to make a change to a tree that was literally as big around as my thigh at the base, and probably about as big around as my calf at climbing height. And when I made that move, I sat that I guess 2 days or 1.5 days. But the last day I hunted it, was I was there from sun up till like noon and saw 3 bucks and 6 deer in total, so it was just that small move that was maybe 15 yards from the tree that I was in previously was the difference between seeing all those deer and getting shot opportunities, passed, but still had shot opportunities, and not having a shot opportunity. So that was it's one of the reasons why I like it. And it's way more comfortable than people want to think that it is. I really didn't have any trouble shooting out of it necessarily. That all kind of came pretty quickly to me. But I would definitely say, like, anyone who's going to try it out, you definitely want to do a little backyard practice with it just to kind of get familiar, because it is a different feeling. But
totally, and I highly recommend anyone who's going to hunt from one, set it up, 8 inches off the ground first, and play around with it and check it out. You have no chance of falling from the actual saddle. You literally cannot fall out of one. I've hunted, 10 years. I've probably put who knows how many thousand hunts into saddles, but I've never had anywhere close to a moment where I thought I was going to fall or anything. But learning to hunt, learning how to shoot out of that platform is definitely an interesting thing. You have to learn how to pivot, move your feet. And Greg has some great videos on YouTube for that.
Yep.
But once you get used to the saddle, I just don't see how you can go back to a stand. My entire setup weighs less than 10 pounds, and that's my mobile setup.
Right.
That has my sticks in it, or my steps with my aider. My ropes are on my side, and I have my backpack and my bow. And it's streamlined. It weighs nothing. It's, people ask me all the time, how is that thing comfortable? I'm like, dude, that thing's as comfortable, if not more comfortable, than my recliner in my man cave.
Yeah.
Because that's the angle that I'm leaning in it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm leaned back like I'm, 45 degrees in the man cave. And also, if you look up in the trees right now, or whenever people are listening to this and you look at what branches do and look at what your silhouette looks like from a tree stand
exactly
versus what it looks like in the saddle, everything grows either vertically or hanging off at a 45-degree angle or something, some V-type angle in the woods. And I can't tell you how many deer I've had that they might have seen me move completely. Like I could be reaching for something in my backpack or whatever. They'll see the movement, they'll look up, and they'll pause for a minute, and then they'll just go back to doing whatever they're doing because they just have no clue that 240-pound squirrel up there has sharp sticks and it's ready to fling them at them. But I have not found a con against saddle hunting. I mean, the earlier saddles were uncomfortable. They had shorter bridges, and for bigger dudes, there was a lot of hip pinch involved with that. You really couldn't hunt more than 3 hours or so out of one.
Right.
But the combination of the new saddle with the platform, man, I mean, I've sat dark to dark countless times, and it is just super, super comfortable.
Yeah, and this was my first year using it, and I sat dark to dark. So it wasn't like even as a new saddle hunter, it's like I was able to do the all day sets without a problem. And the other thing that I like about it, like you're talking about the kind of looking like a big branch up there with the angle that you're leaning in. I go back and forth between leaning and sitting, just depending. You know what I mean? Which is really, especially if you use like a Ropeman 1, it's really easy to kind of adjust your bridge and your tether height, you know what I mean? So you can kind of go back and forth between the two if you don't want to stand the entire time. But the thing that I really liked about it was that the doe that I shot this year, it was literally, I hid behind the tree from her because I was going to have to shoot her from my weak side, but I was like, you know what, since I had the saddle, I didn't have to make that shot. I ended up swinging all the way around the tree on the opposite side of the tree and shot her from the strong side. So I had an easier shot. So it allowed me to pick how I wanted to shoot. And then I actually was able to stay behind the tree until and draw while I was behind the tree. That way, whenever she finally presented a shot, I just kind of peeked out around the opposite side and let it rip. And that was it.
It's awesome. It makes you a tree ninja.
I'm full on a tree ninja. But the next thing I'm playing around with now is actually, it's actually something Greg and I are going to cover a little bit. I'm starting to play around a little bit now with like climbing methods because this year was my first year, so I just ended up using my Lone Wolf sticks, which was fine. But I definitely want to do something that's a little lighter. So I'm kind of looking at a 5-step aider with just one stick probably, and I have an aider kind of attached to the bottom of like a 1-step aider at the bottom of the Lone Wolf stick as well. Thinking of using that. I'm also thinking of just going like the old SRT method with like rappelling out without steps. So I'm kind of I don't know if I can pull that off though or not. I don't know that every tree would be appropriate for it, but I'm going to do a little experimenting this year, I think.
That was my like biggest fear. So one of the things that I've tried this year are the bolts. Mm-hmm. So the easy cut hand drill or the whatever that's called, with some grade 8 bolts that just slide into the drilled out hole.
Mm-hmm.
If you're able to drill spots on like private land, that is really awesome because they don't go anywhere. The bolts weigh nothing and super silent, slide right in, out, and there's no trace that you were there, and those little holes heal up pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
The Wild Edge steps for me were like a total game changer because prior to those, I was using my Lone Wolf sticks every time.
Right.
And, I got in touch with the guys over at Wild Edge and I ended up getting some of their steps, and I mean, I couldn't believe that I'd hunted as long as I did without them.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever used them. Are you familiar with the Wild Edge step?
Yeah. I mean, I've not ever used them. I've seen them. I've held them. Like I get the concept. A buddy of mine had a set of them that I was hunting with, and he had them in his box, so he kind of showed them to me because I'd never like looked at them or whatever.
Yeah.
But I've never actually put them on a tree and used them.
The way that they pack down into that pack is just game changer for me. So I had kind of my own little carry sling that I made for my Lone Wolf sticks, and again, I'm 6'3", so 4 lone wolf sticks can get me to like 21, 22 feet, no problem for where my feet are.
Right.
And with the wild edge sticks, of course, those 4 sticks weigh 10 pounds, right?
Right.
Plus the strap. So with the wild edge sticks, I can take a 5-step aider, and I mean, I could hunt with just three of the wild edge steps, which weigh a pound each. And I actually did that a little, but what I found was a lot of my trees in my area are crooked, or some of the trees I'm climbing are crooked, or they have branches on them because I want that back cover. And so it was easier for me to take 6 wild edge steps in, and it's 6 pounds instead of 3, big deal.
Right.
In that bag, and you just don't even realize it's there in my aider. So I'll just put a step at 6 feet, and I'll put one at 4 feet, and then I'll just climb up with my aider and then keep setting them at 6 feet. And I mean, they are rock solid, they are silent, and they are super lightweight. And that combined with the saddle, with the Predator platform, for me has just been phenomenal.
Yeah. What are you using for a pack?
So I was using the Mystery Ranch Pop-Up 18. That is an awesome pack for putting those steps in. But so I film all my stuff, and that was a little cumbersome didn't have enough pockets for me for all the camera gear and crap. So anyone out there who films their own hunts, they can probably sympathize with me that there is a ton of extra shit that ends up coming up the tree with you, especially for solo filming. So what I went back to my Mystery Ranch Treehouse pack. I don't know if you're familiar with that pack, but it's basically a big square pack, and it has a little padding in there. It's made for tree stand hunting. There's just one big main compartment, and it has a little pockets on the insides that I can drop some lenses into for my DSLR. And then my video camera and all that setup. So that's what I've been using now. What I'll do is I put my saddle on at the truck. Well, one thing I think is important to note: I never drive her out of my camo. I always change into my camo at the property, just because where I'm hunting is so high profile. So I don't want to be like driving around in my pickup truck with camo on. And also my truck, I don't have any stickers or anything hunting related on there. It just looks like a normal work truck. But I'll pull up, throw my camo on, throw my saddle on, throw my backpack on with all the stuff in it, and then I'll throw that wild edge bag on over my shoulder. And I mean, it literally, you cannot feel the bag there. It's pretty awesome.
Nice. Yeah, because that's the next thing. Like the 2 things I need to really kind of figure out this year is, one, what I'm going to use specifically for my climbing method, and then 2, this year I used a pack that I've taken Western hunting, because it was able to kind of attach all my head straps and stuff that I could, batten down the hatches, if you will, with all my sticks and stuff like that, and get them into the woods without too much trouble. But this year I want to try to figure out how I can streamline what I'm taking in and the size of things, because when you're hunting in a saddle, it's like I want to limit as much stuff as possible being in the tree, because I don't really want to have anything hanging around me if I can avoid it. That's essentially, I'd like to have a pack that has a little smaller profile.
Yeah, totally. And one of the other things that I've done that Greg actually came up with this idea was taking a daisy chain with a carabiner on the front of it and clipping it onto itself around the tree, and then using one of those gear ties S hooks and clipping that on to use as a bow hanger. That has saved me more time and made it so much easier for me, because what I'll do is I'll just throw that around the tree instead of screwing in my one pack holder and bow holder, and then I'll put my backpack completely on the opposite side of the tree for me. And that really helps break that outline up as well.
100%. Yeah, I have something similar to that, and then I also use a homemade small tether made out of paracord that I actually hang my pack on with like a little prusik that I make. That way I can pull my pack up and down and hang it off to like the side of me, can kind of move it around the tree or bring it back over to me, however, wherever I want it or whatever, and can kind of change the height on it, which has saved me a ton of time too from screwing crap in. So
Look at you, man. You're a natural saddle hunter. You're already tinkering with stuff. And,
yeah, dude, it's in my nature, man. I like to I'm a tinkerer. You know what I mean? So it appeals to me because there's just like I just like the DIY nature of it, man. That's why I'm all interested to kind of figure out what my climbing method's going to be this year because I'm like, there's a lot of options to get up the tree, you know, and it's just a matter of what's going to, you know, work best for you. You know what I mean? And I'm really kind of interested in the whole idea of rappelling because the part that I hate the most is getting out of the tree. Like I hate that part. Like I don't know why. Like I have no problem with heights. Nothing. Didn't matter. Like saddle, tree stand doesn't matter. Like I just don't like climbing out of a tree like after dark. Like because I can't see my feet, you know, and stuff like that. And in a saddle, it's like you're not gonna fall. But I also don't want to like miss a step and smash my face off a stick either. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I would. I've made a pretty good point of avoiding that.
yeah. You know what I mean?
So one thing that I found that's actually really helpful. I took a silver Sharpie. And on the inside of the lone wolf step, I just put a circle. You know, I filled in a circle on all of the steps, and it's amazing how well that lights up with your headlight when it hits it. But
that's actually a really good idea. It's funny because it's not so much when it's warmer out, like early fall. It's when my feet get cold and I can't feel them. That's whenever I hate getting out of the tree because it's like I literally can't feel the steps. You know what I mean? So I'm like, is my foot on a step? I'm like, okay, it feels like I have pressure. I'm good. You know what I mean? It's like, and I'm like, one of these days I'm going to slip and smash my face off the tree and it's going to suck. I was like,
yeah.
You know, it's like I'm not going to fall because I'm always tethered in. I always have a lineman's belt on and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So it's like I practice, you know, I practice safety. But, you know, it's just, if I can I just like the idea of rappelling too. I think it'd just be cool. I would actually look forward to getting out of the tree if I rappelled.
I think that'd be really cool, man. Yeah. I was hunting with a buddy of mine, and so he was like 40 yards from me, and I had these two does come in, and he's watching, and I come to full draw, and this doe stops behind a branch or behind a tree that's like really only 3 inches in diameter, if that. And I kept waiting for her to take a step out, and she wouldn't. And so I just took my right foot and put it up on the tree, kind of at my waist level, and then pushed off with both my feet to get that extra, you know, angle to where I had a clear shot at her vitals. And I shot her, and she ran like 30 yards and piled up. And my buddy, who was in a tree stand, was going nuts. And he's like, "That's the coolest shit I've ever seen." You know, because he watched the whole thing.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, he just keeps telling me that I'm a tree ninja now. That was just like the most radical thing he had ever seen in the woods, and he actually ended up buying a saddle and now hunts from one.
Nice, perfect.
Yeah, all because of that hunt that day. He just thought it was so cool.
Right.
But I mean that part of the thing that's fun about the saddle, to what you're saying in the DIY is, you know, when you buy a lone wolf tree stand and lone wolf sticks, that's what you get.
Yep.
Right, and you can maybe, you know, tie some paracord on it to silence where they hit together or whatever. But like that's the system. And with a saddle, the saddle is just the beginning of the possibilities as to how you can hunt. You can customize it so much, whether your climbing method or if you want to customize, you know, how you put your feet up, or, you know, if you want to have a platform or the, you know, plastic steps or the wild edge steps all around the tree. I mean, all those different options are so cool to be able to make the most ultimate hunting system for you. And that's what's cool, is because everyone's different. We all have different needs. We're all hunting different places. Why not have the ability to adapt to your surroundings and how you personally want to hunt?
Yeah. No, 100%, man. Like that's the thing that I liked about it the most. Like it was immediately like you could make it, you could personalize it. It's all what you need it and want it to be. You know what I mean? And if you would want to buy the system and just use some sticks and kind of like I did this year, and you just kind of use the system and that's what you want to do, then man, you can have great success doing that too. You know what I mean? You don't necessarily have to. But for those out there, like, you know, most hardcore, you know, whitetail hunters, it's like we're always kind of tinkering with our gear and personalizing it and modifying it and stuff like that to make it do what we want it to do. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know that I've ever bought anything that just, I got it out of the box and was like, yep, that's it. Yeah. Taking it to the tree. You know what I mean? It's like, it always takes like an amount of like figuring out and silencing and stuff like that to say, okay, now this thing's worthy to head to the tree with me. But, you know, it's, I don't know, man. It's cool. I really dig it. I don't, envision myself really hunting out of a tree stand much, going forward, except for maybe some preset stuff that I have on some of the family properties, just from a ease of use and speed into the tree type of perspective. But I even wear my saddle whenever I hunt out, because when I was in Ohio, I did hunt out of a stand, because there was one tree that I had that historically I could get a stand into that I used. And I actually wore my saddle into the stand, and that's just what I used for my harness, because I would also take my sticks, and then if I needed to make a move, I could get down and make a move, and I had all my saddle gear with me. So that was kind of why it was set up like that, was here's a stationary spot, and if I need to pivot from here, then I can. I'll have my stuff to do it. I don't have to tear down the set to make the move, which worked great. And dude, I felt way safer even being in a tree stand wearing my saddle as my harness.
Yeah.
Than I did with like a traditional, safety harness. So.
Oh, for sure. Well, because you can swing around the tree. I mean, the fact that you can keep the tree. I mean, first of all of its climbing rated gear, it's rated to like,
ridiculous
thousands
weight.
of kilonewtons as opposed to, just barely making the 300-pound minimum for the TSA. But I mean, and I was actually talking about this with somebody the other day. He was like, well, when you're in a tree stand, you're on a metal platform relying on two cables that have been exposed to the elements for God knows how long.
Yep.
And one tiny little bolt.
Yep.
And with your saddle, you have all this rope that is used, that people are trusting their life on Everest to,
Yep.
I mean, what's 20 feet off the ground for that?
Right.
So
yeah, exactly. Like literally, like the weight rating for that buckle and the straps are like you could drop a Volkswagen from 6 feet. you know what I mean? And it's gonna hold up.
I think somebody took some AM steel on one of those wild edge steps and like pulled their ATV up onto the step on a tree, and it was totally fine with the winch.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it, man, because those things are like Amstel. That 1/4-inch Amstel is rated for like 7,000 pounds or something like that.
Well, that's what it's made for, is for winch work on an ATV. So I mean, the saddle, I understand where people look at that and they're like, you hunt out of that? Like, what is that?
Yep.
But once they get past that initial point, I think it's pretty easy to realize, hey, this is better than a traditional tree stand. And I highly recommend checking out those bolts for your preset spots. They're pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, I'll have to give those a whirl. But man, we've covered a lot of ground, brother. I think we're I think we're good, man. I think we touched on just about everything. We talked about babies, we talked about hunting heritage, we talked about saddle hunting, urban hunting. I don't even know what else we threw in there. Some holiday cheer we threw in there too. We
started talking about meat and all kinds of fun stuff on there. So yeah, man, that was a blast.
Nice.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet, man. Before I let you go though, man, like if you wouldn't mind, just give folks a heads up as to where they can find out more about you and follow along with your antics.
Yeah, Instagram is the best place to find me. It's Urban Bowman. Also, a group of buddies and I have hunt.urban, and we're going to be coming out with a follow-up on the film of kind of a day-to-day series of fun stuff you see in the suburbs and hunts from the stand and video. So check that out on YouTube when it comes out.
Nice. Cool. Well, I'll be sure to check out the old hunt.urban. I'll look forward to seeing what you got going on there. And thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it. And let's make sure we stay in touch, and I'll see if I can't get you up to one of those farms next year.
Sounds good, man. Have car and bow. We'll travel. So
Nice.
Thanks for having me on, and look forward to chatting soon.
All right, brother. I appreciate it. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. We'd like to thank Taylor for joining. Be sure to give him a follow on Instagram. And, of course, I'm sure he'll be posting things there as he nears the launch of the urban.hunt, the site that'll have all the video content from the day-to-day hunts that he and his buddies are going on in the urban setting. So stay on the lookout for that. I'll put the links to his Instagram, Facebook, etc. in the blog post show notes so you guys can easily find them. We'd of course like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to the iTunes. Yeah, to the iTunes. Please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done that yet.
We'd be super appreciative if you'd be able to do those 2 things for us. And before we shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. Wicked Tree Gear, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Trophy Ridge, Ozonics, Obsession Bows, Tecumani Seed, Glacier Coolers, Ramcat Broadheads, Trophy Taker Rests, and Dead Downwind. And until next time, we'll see y'all.